Hello everyone, I welcome you all to the third lecture of week 1. This week is titled as Visual Narratives in Print, and today's lecture will be focusing on Jan Baten's article titled Stories and Storytelling in the Era of Graphic Narrative. While I am giving lectures on the articles, and as the previous lecture was on the Gordon's article and the first lecture was on Gillian Rose's visual methodologies, I would like to tell my students that in this week 1, we will be familiarizing ourselves with the methodological framework of studying visual text, because whenever we pick up any kind of text, it is very important how we read it. What are the choices that we are making it? What are the inputs? What are the tools that we are utilizing in studying the text? So, in this article, which is titled as Stories and Storytelling. So, storytelling itself is a phenomena or is an art which is done in the narrative form. You can only follow a story when it has a certain narrative. According to Aristotle, the narrative or the plot structure should have a perfect beginning, a proper beginning, middle and end. And if these three are missing in any kind of narrative, it is very difficult for the reader, for the listener, for the viewer, whatever medium you may be watching, to decipher the meaning of the story. But in today's postmodern generation, in today's postmodern world, the narrative, the linear form of the narrative is itself being questioned. So, in this article, we will see how the form of narrative is itself changing in the age of postmodernism, which is being discussed by Jan Batens. So, Batens starts her article by signifying the importance of narrative. She says, stories are universal. The difference between stories has to do with the issues of medium and medium specificity. So, it is important which form are you choosing to tell the story, because the politics of every medium differs. So, the art of storytelling in a film, the art of storytelling on television, the art of storytelling in comic books, the art of storytelling in graphic novels, which are so many times considered synonymous to be each other, comics and graphic novels, they also differ extremely. In a world of multimedia today, words are still judged as being more suitable for storytelling than just images, which are typically suited to description and the representation of fixed objects. Within the field of visual storytelling, imposed by the spread of mobile images or the combination of words and images in multiple panels and series, certain media and image types continue to face strong resistance, either because they are considered hybrid and therefore impure, because cultural gatekeepers define them as lowbrow, if not utterly vulgar. So, she very well identifies the bias, the prejudice that we have with the textual or the written word when we compare the same with the visual text. Readers tend to have a sort of prejudice or bias against the visual medium, thinking it to be very non-serious medium of storytelling, because since time immemorial, visual storytelling, which is particularly done through comics and graphic novels, is being considered as the children's literature, is being considered something fit only for children, because only children are inclined, or only children are interested to see everything in the visual form, while the elderly, the mature, the intellectual people are said to be reading the text in the literary form, where you can use English words or any kind of language that is more suitable for their reading. In the contemporary narrative, the graphic narrative is not just intramedial but also intermedial, being comparative. The emergence of graphic novel is usually treated as postmodernist phenomenon that has made its way through hybridization of media and art forms, and secondly, the progressive dismantling of the frontiers between high and low art. So, the very emergence of the graphic novel. Why did the graphic novel emerge? What was the use of graphic novel if comics already existed? These are the questions which are raised by Jan Batens, where she looks at the fact that the very emergence, the very reason why graphic novel emerged as a form, as a literary form in the 21st century, lies in the fact that we are living in a postmodern age, which is a very complex age, which has no linearity, and where there are all kinds of stories that need to be told in so many diverse forms, that to find just one form, we are falling short of any literary form that can justify or that can do the justice to our postmodern reality. And that is why the graphic novel has presented itself as a solution in our age. Graphic narrative, which includes both graphic novels and comics, is culturally valuable form of storytelling. However, Baitens goes further than this to explain the need for this genre. If the public continued to look for models and examples that told readers how to shape their lives, how to behave in society in a responsible and satisfying way, and how to work on personal taste and individual development, all crucial incentives for the larger consumption of literary narratives, modern literature had become increasingly reluctant to cater to these needs, to which it preferred an aesthetically more radical yet socially more narrow exploration of its own characteristics. So this is what I just explained, that any textual, any literary form is now falling short to depict the reality of the postmodern world, because the postmodern world is filled with montage-like reality, is filled with breaks, is filled with discontinuities. And how are you going to explain these realities in a literary form where you have chapterizations and the next chapter has to follow where the previous chapter has left? So this kind of discontinuities can only be explained through graphic novel, because graphic novel not only deals with the postmodern reality, but it also brings together different kind of visuals. For example, if there is something that a literary word cannot explain and a novelist wants to use a photographic image, so in a very hardcore canonical literary text, it is very difficult to jumble up all forms together. But graphic novel presents this idea to jumble all forms together in a visual image on pages, so that that entire reality does not just get restricted to the literal word alone, but images of various sort also constitute reality. So, graphic narrative emerges as a bridge between high and low art and could very well be cited as middlebrow genre. Baitens explains that the failure to prove readers with an appropriate form, which more than a novel could include the challenges of postmodernism, led to the rise of graphic novel. So, some of the features of graphic novel is that it includes postmodern character, which has montage, photographs, artwork, etc. The second characteristic is that a serious fiction for readers who no longer had the time to read long novels. Yes, again, who has time in this today's world where so many stories are being told on OTT, where the user can choose to see the story at their own convenience whenever they are free. So who has time to read lengthy novels when the entire reality can be told in a more appealing form through graphic novel, where you have visuals of all kinds and a very brief story. Graphic narratives offer themselves as forms of literature that are dramatically narrative as well as highly popular but not necessarily highbrow, in a way meeting the challenges as posed in the contemporary times. The beginning of graphic narrative, how it all began, how pictures were put into a book form where they will be read in the form of a narrative. Graphic narratives became prominent in the 1980s as they developed a newer model and a paradigm that was easier for the audience and lay readers to relate to than the sophistications generated by modern literature. The success and prominence of graphic narratives cannot be separated from a larger demand for storytelling in print. Graphic novels, such as Will Eisner's A Contract with God, which was published in 1978, were framed and marketed as serious fiction for readers who didn't have the time to read long novels. Graphic narratives can help the readers reflect on the cultural and historical embeddedness of any given storytelling practice. So now we deal with the reasons for the emergence of graphic narrative. So what Baton says is that graphic narrative is no longer a term that refers to vividly and visually explicit narrative, which can be performed by purely verbal means as well, but an umbrella term that designates the narrative use of sequentially arranged photographs or drawings, often supported or enhanced by captions, speech bubbles, and other verbal elements. So, thus, what Batens is doing is that he's kind of expanding the meaning, expanding the definition of graphic narration, which may not only be considered particularly in relation to comics and graphic novels alone, but he is kind of designating the term to any kind of narrative which is sequentially drawn. It can be arranged in the form of photographs or drawings, or it can be enhanced by these photographs, and drawings can also be accompanied simultaneously by speech bubbles or captions or verbal elements. So all such kinds of narratives, they may or may not be in the print form. Baton's classifies all of them as a graphic narrative. He also says it is commonly assumed that the opening of literature and literary studies to comics and graphic novels is a typically postmodern phenomenon, which firstly has to do with the continuous hybridization of media and art forms. And since comics and graphic novels generally combine words and images, they are perfect candidates for this kind of hybridization. So he's also focusing on the emergence, why and how and under what condition did this form emerge. And he says that the emergence of graphic novel seems to be a postmodern phenomenon where the literature, the mainstream literature, the literary form in the form of canonical novels tend to have failed, and tend to have failed in the way that they are not complete enough in a kind of representing or narrating the existing reality, which is very bifurcated, which is very complex, which is very non-linear. And here the novel forms or any kind of typical literary form fail, and that is why graphic novel in the form of hybridization of media and art forms through the combination of pictures as well as words has offered itself as a kind of solution. The graphic narrative case is therefore an excellent illustration of the cultural and historical embeddedness of any storytelling practice. Stories may be universal and ubiquitous, but their diverse form are not equal, their social status is different, as is the degree of acceptations of storytelling in different fields. Moreover, these forms compete with one another at moments of change, which also generate internal changes within each form. Next, he says, in other words, if the public continued to look for models and examples that told readers how to shape their lives, how to behave in society in a responsible and satisfying way, and how to work on personal taste and individual development, all crucial incentives for the larger consumption of literary narratives, modern literature had become increasingly reluctant to cater to these needs, to which it preferred an aesthetically more radical yet socially more narrow explanation of its own characteristics. So, once again, he is kind of expanding on the very similar argument by saying that the contemporary literature has failed to meet the contemporary challenges, the ongoing challenges of the postmodern era, and thus we also need to reinvent the form of telling stories, which can tell new kinds of stories in this new aged world. Further, he says, new types of gatekeepers and collective involvement in reading appeared as demonstrated by the tremendous success of Oprah Winfrey and other Middlebrough tastemakers such as Martha Stewart, who proved capable of offering in a user-friendly way what a liberal arts education, over-specialized and dramatically turned towards theoretical sophistry, were no longer providing affordable models and best practices for building a good life. So he categorizes this graphic narration as the Middlebrough art, not the high art or the low art. Low art, which can be categorized as the popular art, high art, which can be categorized through canonical novels, classics that have been written in English and other languages.
But he categorizes this emergence of graphic narration as kind of an event where you also see that there are shows like Coffee with Karan, where they are being called undoubtedly on a platform which is chat show, just like the Oprah Winfrey show emerged in the Western media. But the people participating in these shows are very renowned people of show business, very renowned people from entertainment industry, from business field, from globally popular icons. So in a way, these kind of shows emerge as a platform where kind of, these shows are being very popular and very much in demand by the people in general, by the masses in general, who tend to consume these shows as a way of knowing their icons more. So the thing is, it is in the same fashion, it is in the same trend that graphic novel itself also offers as a middle brow art, where comics, which is generally considered as a low brow art, and literature, which is considered as very canonical or very high art, which is liked by the people of very refined taste, tend to come together through this form of graphic novel. And when the graphic novel emerges with the combination of verbal and visual forms, it tends to be placed, or it is kind of placing itself in the new form that can be called as the middle brow art, which can also be seen in very popular media shows of Oprah Winfrey, as well as in the shows of Coffee with Karan show, which is very popular in India these days.
Now, the genre, the politics of the genre. How is it different? How is it being projected? How is it being received? How it is being consumed? So, the entire politics related to production, consumption, and distribution of graphic novels is also very important in order to understand the reason behind its emergence and its continued success. There has remained a certain amount of tension or split between comics and graphic novels. A few widely held distinctions between the two are, so obviously, as I said, comics were always relegated or were considered as a children's literature, as a kind of low art which were only suitable for the children, as they did not have anything intellectual to communicate. No academic researches were done in comics earlier, but it was very recently that people considered that comics are producing a culture through which a society is getting reshaped. So then there was a focus on the comics, and they were treated much more than the children's literature. But still, I feel there is certain biasness, where the academicians, where the researchers are trying again to segregate and trying very hard to point it out that graphic novels are much more serious, and they are much more academic, and they are much more scholarly, and hence they are different. So they should be treated in a very different way. Again, we are falling in the same trap of kind of sidelining or kind of building hierarchies among visual texts. Comics are for kids. At the same time, graphic novels target at an adult audience. A team of artists are involved in the making of comics, while graphic novels are mostly made by individual authors. This is important, who are in charge of both the writing and drawing of the stories. Comics are generally serial stories which continue as long as the public remains keen to buy them, while graphic novel tends to be standalone, which require the author to reinvent themselves at each new publication. Comics have to obey a strict publication format. For example, they need to be in a certain size, their packaging needs to be done in a proper way, because they have an identification among its receivers, among the distributors, because only when they are packaged and distributed in a certain format, they are kind of capitalizing on their identification, they are capitalizing on their popular form. That is why they are getting distributed at such a large number. So size, number of pages, serialization, rhythm, while graphic novels may have various formats and publication types, and so on. One of the prime differences that concerns graphic novels and their zeal in rejecting the popular features of storytelling: target-oriented plots, high-speed action, heroic figures, thematic exaggerations, formulaic style, and other visual and narrative standardization. So the graphic novel is not compelled to kind of create an interest in its readers. It does not have to be a superhero graphic novel so that children are inclined to buy it. But graphic novel have their own needs, have their own desire to create a graphic novel where they think that a particular story needs to be told in a visual form. So they don't have a target audience, but their audience is created only when the graphic novel comes into the market. So it is as per the interest of the users, as per the interest of the readers and viewers, whether they decide to buy the graphic novels or not. Unlike the comics, where the readership is fixed, where they know who is their reader, who is going to buy their books, and as a result of it, they tend to make their comics to interest their readers. Graphic novels tend to focus on anti-heroes, emphasizing the absence of action, underscoring repetition, boredom, and uneventfulness both thematically and visually. So it need not be necessary that when you are reading a narrative in the graphic novel form, it will be a superhero story. On the contrary, it is an anti-hero. It kind of dismantles the heroism built by Superman comics or Batman comics. It tries to give due importance to the stories of common man. It tries to give due importance to the stories of common public who are left unacknowledged in most of the times. The second major difference concerns comics are as being genre specific, where they remain close to genre-based conventions. In contrast, graphic novels deconstruct existing formulaic genres or invent and make use of genres that are unavailable to comics, such as autobiography or documentary. So graphic novel can be presented in any kind of form, unlike comics. Comics are fictional stories. Comics are something which are made only to interest as per the understanding of the children. But graphic novels can be autobiographies, can be biographies, can be documentary. So there is no particular literary form to which graphic novels are attached. The existing hierarchy between comics and graphic novels suggests that former is an attempt to accommodate the genre into literature, which can be completely removed from low art of comics, which is cheap and unintellectual. How is graphic novel different from comics? Now, the difference between the two. On the one hand, the refusal of old genres of comic storytelling, all typically genre fiction formats, adventure, fantasy, science fiction, horror, as well as the more general attempt to escape the constraints of action-driven storytelling, help the graphic novel bring to the fore uncharted territories, subjects, themes, and characters. So just as I said that the landscape, the graph, or the space for graphic novel to explore is much more diverse than the comics. Comics are very limited in their storytelling, that they always have to be understood by children of certain age, by people of certain age, but graphic novel do not fall into the trap of any understanding. All the more graphic novels, as they are proceeding, as the genre is developing, have become all the more very complex when you go and see the novels of Sarnath Banerjee and other graphic novels by Indian graphic novelists. On the other hand, this shift is not deprived of new stereotypes, some of which, as Vogue's quotation cunningly suggests, are dictated by the artistic superego of the newly emerged pseudo-literary form. In an attempt to be taken seriously as real literature, graphic novels copy the most directly available writing techniques, those taught in countless creative writing classes, and therefore even more easily fall prey to all kind of cliches real literature would try to escape. So sometimes, graphic novels, while trying hard to differ from the literary text and also from comics, does fall into the stereotypes which are laid by literary texts. For example, the novels and biographies and documentaries, as well as the comics form, which is meant only for children's reading. The combination of new ambitions and old forms also becomes very clear in the graphic novel's attitude towards a fundamental technological feature of contemporary storytelling named digitization. So, the graphic novel form Now, in today's age, with the development of technological advancements, is not restricting itself only to be published in paper, but today we see graphic novels also being produced digitally, which we will further do in our course in the upcoming week. So, what are the ways in which graphic novels tells its stories? Graphic narratives remain tied to the publishing business, where commercial obligation necessitates an intermediate or transmedial form of storytelling, with each medium making its independent contribution to the unfolding of the story. The tendency towards intermedialization, the combination of several media within a single work, is much stronger in the graphic novel industry than in the comics field. So, as I said, there is a mix of media. Most graphic novelists are opposed to the phenomenon of digitization as compared to the comic industry, where the latter is offering most of its products in electronic formats. In the digital environment, the usage of the clicking through button has pervaded the comic field with a certain linearity rather than the combination of linearity and simultaneity. Simultaneous presence of images and visual elements with a certain kind of frame that necessitates the graphic novel. In the conclusion, Baton says, graphic narrative as a phenomenon cannot be explained in literary or artistic terms alone. Graphic storytelling is a multi-layered process in which technical, aesthetic, historical, and ideological dimensions are inextricably intertwined. A universal formulaic model cannot be regarded for the development of stories, as the latter necessitates attention to individual or local contexts and certain forms of anachronisms. Thank you.